Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another LinkedIn Live here with the Veracode team. My name is Brian Roche. I am our Chief Product Officer, and joining me today is Chris Wysopal, our co-founder and CTO, and Mansi, one of our principal researchers on the security team. So great to have you all with us.
Good to be here, Brian. This is some exciting times in application security land.
It is. Mansi, I know you've been very busy since last Friday. I think maybe we can recap what has occurred for everybody. On December 9th, severe remote code vulnerability was revealed in Apache's Log4j, a very common logging system used by developers and applications. The vulnerability affects a broad range of services and applications. And I think over the weekend, I fielded a lot of calls from people asking me, what is it? What's the vulnerability? Tell me what a 0-day is. And I thought maybe we could unpack it at that high level before we get into all of the technical details. So maybe, Chris, I'll give it over to you and ask you, what was communicated last Friday? And maybe we can net that out in very simple terms for everybody.
Yeah, sure. So, the high level class of vulnerability here is, the application is mixing code and data, right? It's taking a data input and it's interpreting that and executing things that are in there, like looking up variables, calling other websites that are defined. And this is basically, a bad practice. The challenge here is when you're logging things, you want to kind of log the raw input from that you're getting from over the web or over some other transaction, so you see exactly what came through. And the problem is some of that data that comes through gets interpreted by the Log4j library in a protocol called JDNI. And the first exploit that came about was people could reach out to an LDAP server and actually pull down code and then execute it, which seems like a horrible idea for a log library to have this functionality.
Absolutely.
But since the people have been figuring out how to sort of turn that off. But what's happening is there's other ways we're seeing that this Log4j functionality is executing things like doing DNS queries based on environment variable names and things like that. So there's a lot of little ways that attackers are figuring out how to leak information just by sending input into a field in a web form that gets logged. I don't know, Mansi, if you have anything you can help us understand a little more of the mechanism of how this can be exploited.
No, you covered it well. That's how when an attacker control URL is put into a web browser in a web server, or it makes it to the logging functions. That's when, if the attacker is controlling a particular third-party server and it is attacker control, attacker can do anything back to where the logging is happening. So that's what actually creates the havoc.
So, Mansi, for those that are asking questions in the chat, there have been other vulnerabilities reported before. What makes this one unique, and what makes this one so bad?
Log4j is a very common library used in many Java applications, as we are talking about and seeing live in last 3 days. That's one big thing. And second thing is it's for troubleshooting purposes, it's a very common practice of logging the user inputs directly in your logs for any number of reasons. So it's basically, the usage is very widespread, the library is equally widespread. That's what creates this particular situation we are in.
Got it. So for both of you, then maybe you can net it out. So if I have Java, am I affected? Like, what is the spread of impact here?
Yeah, I think if you're using Java in your organization, you're probably also using Log4j somewhere. It is the most popular logging library. Logging is just a basic application thing, so you can troubleshoot either security issues or just functionality issues, and understand how your application is working. So if you're using Java somewhere in your organization, you probably are impacted. And another thing that makes this really a challenging vulnerability to track down is there's a lot of things that you wouldn't normally think of as a risky application because it's not talking directly to the internet. It's a back-end process. It's a batch job that runs every few hours. There could be other Java processes that aren't talking directly to the internet that are handling input from the user as part of a batch job or a back-end job. And if they're using Log4j, which they probably are, you could have exploits, servers exploited deep inside your application that you just don't really normally think about. And one of the ways we're seeing this is people are saying they're trying to exploit a server and they're seeing 6 hours, 12 hours later, they're getting a response. And to me, that tells me that it's something that's a delayed process. But if they're getting that response back, that means that they could potentially run execute code.
Got it. So I am sufficiently terrified now. So this is a fluid situation since last Friday. I know there's been a lot of information and indeed misinformation. What is it that we have learned, Mansi, since Friday? And tell me, how do I fix this if it's prevalent in my organization today?
I think the easiest and the cleanest way right now is update to the latest patched version of Log4j, which is out there for download. That's the easiest and the cleanest way to do it. There are other ways, like people who can't update it as soon as possible for n number of reasons. They should still prioritize this, but if they can't, then there are a few different switches they can turn off, which will effectively try to shut off just the JNDI protocol lookup. But it is still a fluid situation. We might still see other protocols which might come up, other payloads which might come up. So still the cleanest way is still this. And for there are questions which have been asked for the previous version of Log4j.2.x, which is the one which is being asked about. So it's a good news. A little bit of good news there is like they did not have this functionality enabled by default, except if they were using one particular appender called, obviously, the JMS the appender. So if they are using that, then they should then they are pretty vulnerable. But otherwise, there are still a lot of reasons. There are still a lot of RCs why Log4j was like put end of life like 6 years ago, and we are never going to get a patch from it. So still they should update to 2.x. But for just talking about this particular vulnerability, they are not impacted if they are not using the appender.
Got it. And Mansi, is it fair to say that you are still actively researching potential paths here? Is that correct?
That's pretty correct. Yep.
Yeah, got it. Chris, what have you learned since last week?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that researchers are running honeypots out there, and these honeypots is a way of detecting when people are doing mass scanning of the internet for vulnerabilities. The honeypot looks like a vulnerable server, and the attacker's code will try to exploit the vulnerability. So over the weekend, these people running honeypots are learning that activity is ramping up. It's coming from more IP addresses, and they're starting to see different styles of attacks, and they're starting to see toolkits kind of evolve, where it's clear that attackers are building their toolkits, and they're even seeing things like Windows executables coming across as payloads, where attackers are going to try to find a system that's configured so that they can exec a Windows process, for instance, or a Linux process. So it's all that's sort of the evolving part is what's the exploitation going to look like. We know you can run Java code. We know you can leak data back to a DNS server, for instance. And how are attackers going to patch those together to be able to make a solid basically an implant where they can exploit the server and retain control of that server, and maybe even patch the issue so that other people can't control that. So I think the next few days we're going to start to see a race of attackers, and I think we're going to start to see some widespread attacks.
So if I read what you're saying, we're essentially at the beginning of this, and this is going to have a long tail.
Exactly. Just as we worked over the weekend, patching systems and helping our customers patch their systems, the attackers were exploring the devious side of this vulnerability. And we're not done yet patching, and they're not done yet figuring out the best way to exploit it. So, we're probably going to be back tomorrow talking about new information as it evolves.
Got it. So just a couple of questions before I let you guys go. So we live and breathe security, and absolutely we were working all this weekend to secure our servers. So we're very proud of that. So we are secure. But can you tell me, for those that are not in the security community, could you maybe share with me, like, what are honeypots? What is JNDI? What is a zero-day vulnerability? There's a lot of questions over the weekend, and what are these things? I don't live and breathe this every day. I think we've talked about how you can be affected, but maybe you can knit out for us what those terms are.
Well, I'll leave the JNDI to Mansi, but I'll do the other ones. So, a honeypot is basically you're running a vulnerable server in like in a virtual machine where you have control that, the attackers will look at this and they'll see it as a vulnerable server, but they won't be able to compromise your network. It's basically an experiment by a researcher, and they log how attackers interact with this vulnerable server. Not with Log4j, right? They're doing full packet logs probably on the network, and they're seeing what the attacks look like. That helps them understand the capabilities of attackers, build signatures, potentially build other mitigations that maybe you could do over the network, things like that. So that's what people with honeypots are doing, and they just see what kind of activity is happening. Right. On the 0-day side, a 0-day is basically a vulnerability where the patch is not available yet. This had a very short window that it was a true 0-day once it became public. There is some talk that people saw this being exploited perhaps weeks ago, where no one knew it existed. The Apache team couldn't even patch it; they didn't know it existed. But sometime early Friday, it got a patch, and that patch was available, and other mitigations were available. So then it sort of becomes a +1 day, a +2 day. I think we're in +3 day now. So people have had 3 days to patch. And you'd say, well, why can't you patch in 3 days? It's probably because most organizations have hundreds of servers to patch. Right. So it is a very big effort. So Mansi, maybe you could explain a little bit what this JNDI is and why this is such a problem here.
So it's a great question. Even I had to look up the full form of JNDI because it is just so loosely thrown around. So it's a Java naming and directory interface. It's Java's API kind of an interface for whenever it needs to talk to any directory based inquiries. So LDAP falls under that. So that's what is in the problem.
So Log4j essentially has LDAP support built in, and that LDAP support is implemented in such a way that it's exploitable, right?
Yes.
Got it. Okay, very good. Well, you both look very rested for having worked all weekend to patch our service and put us in place where we are secure and safe. Before I let you go, I just want to ask you all, so where do we go for more information? This is obviously a fluid situation. We said that we were going to be back tomorrow to do another LinkedIn Live and broadcast across the internet. But where can folks go to find additional information?
So we've been keeping our blog post up to date when we get new information. Like one of the latest pieces of information is, there's been ways to bypass some of the mitigations that were available on different versions of Java. So we're updating that. So it's clear to people that they really need to update the library and they can't count on a mitigation in a newer version of Java. And this is just as different exploit techniques and bypasses are discovered. So we're keeping that blog post up to date. I think we updated at 3 a.m. last night. We're going to be updating it very shortly in the next hour with the latest information. So there's that on our website. I think, I'm following this on Twitter. And so for the attacker side, where people who are running honeypots and they're talking about the attacks they're seeing, Gray Noise is a good site for that, or follow them on Twitter, because they basically have a big honeypot network. So that, come to Veracode for the defense side. Look to some of these companies that are running honeypots to understand what the offense is doing.
Got it. So I'm seeing a bunch of questions come in, and I thought maybe I'd ask you both. I'm sorry, Mansi, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I just wanted to add the Log4j, the Apache Log4j site's security page is also, they are trying to keep things updated too. So
very good. So just we'll take a couple of questions for folks that are posting them. So this question is around what incident response and what should my incident response look like. And I think we would say that incident response is really a structured methodology for handling security incidents, breaches, and cyber threats. And really the best defense is to be prepared before these events happen. But what happens if you're not prepared? Talk to us a little bit about detection, analysis, and containment and eradication. And then what should happen post-incident, I guess. Maybe just in in a minute, just to give us a brief overview of your take on that.
Well, there are indicators of compromise, IOCs, that have been published that you can look for in your file systems, in your log directories, in your logs. And I don't have one handy, but basically, SOC teams should have that information readily available, so that they can see if they've been exploited.
Got it. Okay, perfect. So question in the chat. So what about .NET? If I have .NET, am I impacted?
No. This is just Java, and it's only if you're using that Log4j.2.x library.
Got it. Okay. Well, listen, I want to thank you both. Hopefully you get to take a little bit of rest. The research is super valuable, and we appreciate it. That is all we have time for. Chris and Mansi, thank you so much for joining me. We will do this again tomorrow, and we will make sure that we keep updating folks on what is happening out there. So that is it. Until next time, thank you, and see you guys.